never used to believe in the supernatural, ghosts, demons, possessions. It all seemed like nonsense to me. That changed after the first time I experienced sleep paralysis. It started out like any other night. I was exhausted from working a 12-hour nursing shift and couldn't wait to crawl into bed. As soon as my head hit the pillow, I was out like a light. A few hours later, I awoke with a start. Something felt off. I tried to sit up and look around my dark bedroom, but realized with dread that I couldn't move a muscle. My arms and legs felt like they were made of lead. No matter how hard I strained, they wouldn't budge. My heartbeat quickened. What the hell was happening? I tried to call out to my husband sleeping beside me, but I couldn't make a sound. It was like every part of my body was paralyzed except for my eyes, which were darting around the room in panic. That's when I saw it. There was a dark, human-shaped figure standing in the corner of the room. My blood turned to ice as it slowly started creeping towards the bed. Its limbs bent at unnatural angles. The closer it got, the more menacing it became. Where its face should have been was just a black, featureless void. I desperately tried to scream, to kick, to do anything to fight back, but it was useless. The shadowy entity was now looming over me, so close I could feel its cold, damp breath. What did it want from me? I couldn't even shut my eyes. I was forced to stare, paralyzed, as it reached out an elongated arm and stroked my face. Just then, my alarm clock went off, flooding the room with light. As soon as the sound pierced the air, I could move again. I leapt out of bed and turned on all the lights, searching every nook and cranny for any sign of the entity. But it was gone. I told myself it must have just been a nightmare. Sleep paralysis or something like that. But deep down, I knew what I had seen. This was only the beginning. Over the next few weeks, the visits from the shadow figure became more and more frequent. At first, it only came once or twice a week, but soon it was appearing every single night, and each time it would get a little closer before I broke free from its paralyzing grip. I became terrified to go to sleep. I tried everything: sleeping pills, dream catchers, leaving the lights on all night. Nothing worked. Every time I let my guard down, I would wake up immobile with the entity inches from my face. Its skeletal hands would reach towards me, fingers brushing against my skin. I wanted to cry out for help, but all I could do was lie there, frozen in horror. Sometimes it would whisper disturbing things in a voice that sounded like static on an old radio. I couldn't make out most of the words, but a few stood out. Mine, take, you. The lack of sleep started to take its toll. During the day, I was irritable and could barely focus on anything. My coworkers kept asking if I was all right. I didn't know what to tell them, that I was being terrorized by a shadow demon every night. They'd think I was crazy. One night, it went too far. I awoke to find the entity's face just inches from mine, its empty black sockets staring directly into my eyes. Before I could even react, it forced my mouth open, and I felt something crawl inside. I thrashed with all my might, but couldn't free myself from its hold. Whatever it had put inside me was squirting down my throat. I couldn't breathe. Right as I felt myself about to pass out, my alarm went off and light flooded the room. I bolted upright, gagging and wheezing. I could still feel the residual sensation of that thing slithering into my mouth. With trembling hands, I packed a bag and checked into a hotel that night. I was too scared to stay in my own house. A few nights away seemed to keep the shadow figure at bay, but I knew I couldn't hide forever. Eventually, I would have to go back home and confront it. I decided to contact a local priest, Father Norris, who was known for performing exorcisms and spiritual clearings. I figured he might be able to help. Father Norris listened patiently as I explained what had been happening. To my relief, he didn't accuse me of being crazy or making things up. In fact, he seemed to believe every word. "Something sinister has attached itself to you," he said gravely. He told me we needed to perform a cleansing ritual on my home to drive the entity out for good. Although I was skeptical that it would work, I was desperate enough to try anything at that point. We returned to my house just before nightfall. Father Norris instructed me to draw all the curtains and set up candles throughout the living room. As soon as the sun went down, he began sprinkling holy water and chanting prayers in Latin. I sat anxiously on the couch, waiting for something to happen. At first, nothing did. But then, I noticed one of the flickering shadows cast by the candles seemed to be moving of its own accord. It slowly detached from the wall and crept towards us, morphing into the all-too-familiar humanoid shape. Father Norris didn't stop chanting. If anything, his words grew louder and more insistent, the shadow being hesitated, swaying as though buffeted by an invisible wind. Suddenly, it let out an unearthly shriek and collapsed inward on itself, dissolving into wisps of black smoke before vanishing entirely. I knew without a doubt that it was gone. I could feel it. A weight had been lifted from the house. Father Norris completed the ritual just to be safe, but I sensed I had nothing more to fear. After profusely thanking him, I slept better than I had in weeks. It's been about 6 months now without any sign of the entity's return. I still get chills when I think about that suffocating darkness invading my bedroom night after night. I'll never understand what it was or why it became obsessed with me, but at least now I can sleep in peace, knowing it's been banished back to whatever hellish realm it crawled out of. I'm just grateful I found someone who believed me and knew how to get rid of that thing. Who knows what might have happened if Father Norris hadn't intervened. Let's just say I don't plan on taking my ability to move for granted ever again. The next time I feel pinned to my mattress, unable to scream or struggle, I'll be calling in the professionals, because now I know that the supernatural is all too real, and it's not something you want invading your dreams. I jolted awake, my heart pounding. The room was dark and still, the only sound my ragged breathing. I tried to sit up, but found I couldn't move a muscle. Panic rose in my chest as I realized I was paralyzed. This had happened before, terrifying episodes of waking up unable to move or speak. Sleep paralysis, my doctor called it. Harmless, he said, but this time felt different. The shadows in the corners of my room seemed to twitch and writhe. I strained to see into the darkness. Sure, something was there. The door creaked. Just the house settling, I told myself. Suddenly, a shape began to emerge from the shadows. A dark figure, vaguely humanoid but distorted. Its limbs too long, its head cocked at an unnatural angle. It crouched in the corner, watching me with eyes that glowed red. I desperately tried to scream, but no sound came out. The shadow thing began to slither towards the bed, its uneven gait making my skin crawl. I thrashed against my invisible bonds, but remained paralyzed as the creature loomed over me, its sour breath washing over my face. Up close, I saw rows of jagged teeth protruding from the writhing darkness. A clawed hand caressed my cheek, the icy touch burning my skin. Frantically, I plead in my mind for this to be just a nightmare, but I knew this was horrifyingly real. The creature's mouth opened impossibly wide, row after row of teeth glistening. It lowered towards my face, ready to devour me. This was it. I was going to die alone and afraid, eaten by this monster. Suddenly, I could move. I screamed and thrashed violently away from the thing, tumbling off the bed onto the floor. The room was once again still and empty, only my petrified sobs breaking the silence. Trembling, I huddled against the wall as the first rays of dawn peeked through the curtains. Just a bad dream, I told myself, but I knew what I saw. This thing, this shadow creature, it was real, and it would be back. I didn't sleep the next night, or the night after that. I drank pot after pot of coffee, determined not to succumb to sleep. But by the third night, exhaustion took over. Despite my best efforts, I slipped into unconsciousness. And it was there, waiting. Its writhing form flooded my vision as soon as I opened my eyes. I was paralyzed again, helpless as it crawled onto my bed, its claws scraping the wood, its Its rancid breath assaulted my senses as it brought its face close to mine, studying me. What did it want? Why had it targeted me? I may never know. It opened its maw, ready to strike, but this time I was ready too. Just as it lunged, I mustered every ounce of strength I had and wrenched myself to the side. Its jaws snapped shut where my head had been just moments before. Adrenaline coursed through my veins, granting mobility where I should be paralyzed. I leapt out of bed and ran for the door, the creature screeching furiously behind me. Out into the hallway, I fled, down the stairs and out onto the moonlit street. I ran until my lungs burned, not daring to look back. Had I escaped? Could I ever escape this thing? Exhausted, I collapsed onto the sidewalk, praying the creature hadn't pursued me. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe it couldn't leave my bedroom. Glancing up at my house, I tried to calm my racing heart. But then, I saw it, a silhouette in my bedroom window, staring down at me. It had followed me. It was real, and it would never let me go. I bolted upright in bed, gasping. Just a dream. No, another vivid nightmare. Thankfully, no sign of the shadow creature. My hands still trembled from remembered terror. I knew I couldn't avoid sleep forever. Each night it would return, invading my unconscious mind. I considered seeing a doctor, but I knew no medicine could ward off this evil. Tonight I would try again to withstand its torments. And if I failed, I shuddered to think what it might do next. Could it harm me beyond just my dreams? I rubbed my bleary eyes and turned on every light, trying to ward off the shadows. But already I felt exhaustion creeping up on me. I needed rest, but dare I sleep? My eyes slid shut despite my efforts. No, I can't fall asleep. I begged my body to stay awake. But it was useless. Darkness took me. There it was, leering over my bed, more monstrous than ever. I couldn't move, couldn't even scream. With dread, I realized this was the end. Its claws wrapped around my throat, cutting off air. My vision blurred as its grip tightened. Is this what death felt like? Suddenly, I could breathe again. The creature and its choking hold had vanished. Gasping and sobbing, I sat up, my fingers gingerly touching the bruises forming on my neck. Had I just endured my last terrifying sleep paralysis episode? Had this monster at last released its tormenting hold on me? I knew I should feel relieved. Dread still flooded my heart. Something told me this was not over. I had survived the night, but soon I would be forced to sleep again. And somehow I knew next time I closed my eyes, only one of us would wake up. I jolted awake, my heart racing. The room was dark and still, too still. I tried to sit up, but couldn't move a muscle. My arms, my legs. Everything was frozen, like my body had been encased in cement. I felt a crushing weight on my chest, making it difficult to breathe. Panic rose in my throat as the realization dawned on me. I was experiencing sleep paralysis again. It had been happening on and off for weeks, but this time felt different, more intense. I struggled against the paralysis with all my might, desperate to break free, but remained pinned to the mattress. That's when I saw it, a figure standing in the darkest corner of my room. My eyes strained against the darkness to make out details, but all I could discern was a humanoid shape. Male, from the looks of it, impossibly tall and impossibly thin. My heart hammered against my ribcage as I took in the thing's presence. How did it get in here? What did it want? The figure didn't move. It just stood there, observing me struggle fruitlessly on the bed. Trepidation clenched my gut. Something about this shadow man felt evil, dangerous. Run, my brain screamed, but my body was unresponsive. After what felt like an eternity, the figure slowly started to glide toward me. It moved silently, fluidly, like a specter. Panic flooded my veins with adrenaline as the thing drew closer. I fought with all my might to move even just a finger, but remained paralyzed, helpless. As it approached, more details came into focus. The thing's limbs were unnaturally long and spindly, its fingers tapered into points. Where its face should have been was only blank, pale flesh. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, just smooth, white skin. My eyes widened in horror as the faceless entity loomed over me. This had to be a nightmare, some kind of twisted hallucination, but the crushing weight still pressed on my chest. The too bright moonlight still filtered through the curtains. This was really happening. The figure cocked its head, regarding me curiously. Then it raised an elongated hand and slowly reached toward my face. I mentally recoiled, revulsion rising in my throat, but could do nothing to stop its advance. Helpless, I watched as those narrow fingers drifted closer and closer. Mere inches from making contact, the thing froze. Its smooth, blank face was pointed at the bedroom door, as if listening for something. After a moment, it straightened up and soundlessly glided back into the darkest corner. Relief washed over me, followed by confusion. What was that thing waiting for? What had stopped its creepy examination of me? I stared wide-eyed into the blackness, heart thudding. A heavy silence hung in the air. The dark figure was now completely obscured, lost in shadows. As I lay frozen, straining to see any trace of the entity, a new sound drifted through the stillness. A soft scraping coming from the hallway outside my bedroom. The noise was subtle at first, easy to mistake for the normal nighttime creaks and groans of the old house. But steadily, it grew louder. Scry-up, scry-ape, scry-up, scry-up. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. Something was slowly dragging itself down the hardwood floor toward my room. But what could be making that horrible grinding sound? I tried desperately to wake myself up, to scream, to move even just a single muscle. But my body remained locked in place, a statue made of flesh and bone. Scry-ape. The gut-wrenching noise ceased right outside my door. A heavy stillness followed. I could hear my heart madly beating blood through my temples. What fresh nightmare was this? What was waiting on the other side of that closed wooden door? Amidst the stillness came a soft clicking. The doorknob slowly began to turn. I watched in silent terror, unable to even draw breath into my paralyzed lungs. With an ominous creak, the door swung inward. Shadows spilled into my moonlit room like tarry tentacles. And from out of those roiling shadows crawled a twisted, inhuman shape, dragging the mangled remains of its shattered body across my floor. Broken limbs bent at impossible angles, flesh shredded to ribbons. I tried to scream, tried to squeeze my eyes shut, but could only stare in helpless revulsion as the thing scraped towards my bed, leaving a glistening trail in its wake. Panic exploded within me as the ghastly thing heaved itself atop my helpless, frozen body. I could smell its fetid breath, feel the blood and ichor dripping from its ruined form onto my skin. This was no mere nightmare. This was a horror drawn straight from the depths of hell itself. Up close, in the moonlight, the extent of the thing's horrific injuries became clear. Jagged bones jutted out from torn flesh. Entrails hung like glistening loops of twisted rope. Its face was a pulpy ruin, features obliterated beyond recognition. Cracked lips peeled back to reveal a row of shattered teeth dangling from exposed gums. And yet somehow impossibly, this gruesome monstrosity was alive. I could see its one remaining eye rolled back in agony, could hear the wet rasp of its shredded lungs struggling for air. It wheezed and gurgled above me, limbs juddering, shattered fingers twitching inches from my face. I silently begged for the end to come, for this unbearable encounter to be over, but deliverance did not arrive. The thing had no clear purpose or plan of attack. It simply lay there, a macabre mass of twitching flesh and splintered bone, dripping fluids from its many wounds. My mind recoiled from the reality before me. Madness beckoned, promising a refuge from the horror. Resistance wilted. Abomination became abstraction. Life became dream. Perhaps if I accepted this madness, let go of reason and consciousness, the rising black tide would wash me away to someplace merciful and numb. As my grip on reality faded, a bolt of movement from the corner of my eye jolted me back. The tall shadow man was swiftly crossing the room, heading straight for the bed. No trace of hesitance remained in its jerky gait. Within seconds it was upon us, and with one fluid motion grabbed the broken creature by its shattered neck and ferociously ripped it off of me. The thing let loose an unearthly shriek as it was lifted effortlessly into the air, limbs writhing in agony. With brutal efficiency, the faceless figure commenced tearing the flailing thing to pieces, littering my bed and floor with chunks of flesh. I lay there, coated in cold blood and ichor, unable to move or scream or look away. Within moments, the creature was scattered in pieces around the room. The only sounds now were the soft dripping of blood from the bed and the rasp of air through my frozen lungs. After discarding the last severed chunk of the thing, the faceless figure turned toward me. Cocking its smooth, blank head, it slowly raised one long, thin finger to where lips should have been, making a shosh gesture. Then it drifted back into the darkness and was gone. I lay awake, coated in gore, until sunrise finally broke, and feeling returned to my body in a rush of pins and needles. The broken creature was no remnant left behind, not a single remnant left behind. Since that night, I have never experienced sleep paralysis again. But sometimes when darkness falls, I think I can still see the tall man lurking in the shadows just beyond my vision, waiting, watching over me as I sleep. I've always been a light sleeper. The tiniest noise or movement can jerk me awake in an instant. So when I started experiencing sleep paralysis, it was utterly terrifying. The first time it happened was after a late night out with friends. I had stumbled into bed well after midnight and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. But suddenly I was awake, my eyes wide open, staring up at the dark ceiling. I tried to sit up, to stretch my arms, to kick my legs, but nothing happened. My body was completely paralyzed. Panic coursed through me as I struggled in vain to move even an inch. It felt like some unseen force was pinning me down, holding me prisoner in my own bed. Out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw a shifting shadow in the corner of the room. My chest tightened, and I tried to cry out, but no sound came. The shadow moved closer, taking the shape of a dark humanoid figure with elongated limbs. It was crouched in the corner, facing away from me, swaying slowly back and forth. The hair on the back of my neck stood up as a feeling of complete dread washed over me. My mind was screaming, but my mouth couldn't make a sound. The shadow figure turned, revealing a faceless head with empty black holes where its eyes should be. It started crawling towards me, spider-like, dragging its gangly limbs across the floor. I desperately tried to break free from paralysis, but my body was still frozen in place. The creature was now at the foot of my bed, rising up on its hind legs as its neck elongated towards me. All I could do was lay there in silent terror as its faceless head loomed over me, leaning closer and closer. In that moment, I wanted to scream more than anything in the world, but nothing came out. The creature's head was now just inches from my own, so close I could imagine I felt its breath on my face. Just as it seemed about to touch me, I was finally able to jerk myself awake. For real this time. I sat bolt upright in bed, screaming and drenched in a cold sweat. My room was empty and still. Panting, I fumbled to turn on the light. My hands shook as I gripped the covers, glancing around the room just to reassure myself there was nothing there. It took me hours to get back to sleep that night, terrified the creature would return. In the following weeks, the episodes continued. Always at night, always starting with paralysis and spiraling into vivid, disturbing hallucinations. One night I awoke to see my bedroom door slowly creaking open. There was something on the other side, pushing it inch by inch. A gnarled hand snaked through the widening gap, its twisted fingers groping the air. I tried to get away, but could only watch as the spindly hand crawled across my floor, scrabbling unnaturally like an insect. It scuttled up the side of my bed, the rest of its body still obscured behind the door. I could hear worn floorboards groaning under an unseen weight. The hand crept closer to my face, inch by inch. I could do nothing as its cracked fingernails grazed my cheek. Its flesh was icy cold and damp, leaving a trail of slime across my skin. Just before it touched my eye, I managed to break through the paralysis. The door slammed shut as I screamed myself awake. Night after night, I found myself trapped in episodes of waking nightmares. There was the night an inky black mass seeped out from under my bed, spreading until it had swallowed up the entire room. The night ghostly white faces peered out from my mirror, silently mouthing words I couldn't understand. In the night, unseen hands grabbed my ankles, trying to drag me out of bed and into the darkness below. I was terrified to sleep, but even more terrified to stay awake all night. Exhaustion weakened my grip on reality until I couldn't tell the difference between waking and dreaming. I stopped going out, stopped talking to friends. My days blurred together in a haze of fear and paranoia. One night I awoke yet again to the now familiar paralysis. But instead of another disturbing hallucination, everything was still and quiet. The only sound was my own rapid breathing echoing in my ears. My room was dimly lit by the glow of streetlights outside my window. Shadows played against the walls, but nothing moved within them. After so many nights of horror, the calm felt eerie and unnatural. I just lay there, waiting for something to happen, but nothing did. Gradually, my breathing steadied and my heart rate slowed. The stillness was almost peaceful. My eyelids had just started to droop when there was a loud bang right next to my ear. I jerked violently, a scream catching in my paralyzed throat. Adrenaline coursed through my veins as I lay frozen, listening intently. Silence. Had I imagined it? I couldn't turn my head to look, but my eyes strained to see anything amiss in my peripheral vision. The shadows on the walls didn't seem disturbed. Nothing was out of place. I tried to calm my racing mind. It must have been the house settling or a car going by outside. Just as I finally began relaxing again, it came once more. Bang. This time it was louder, splitting the silence like a gunshot. I would have leaped out of bed if I could move. My chest pounded as I stared wildly into the dark. Bang! 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 One after the other, the explosions of noise came faster and faster. My room shook with the force of them. Pictures rattled on the walls. The lamp on my nightstand teetered precariously. Bang! 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 Right in my ears, yet nothing was there. I strained every muscle trying to break free as the banging grew rapid-fire loud. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The silence rang in my ears. I lay still, gulping air, listening for any sound at all. After what felt like hours suspended in that void, I finally slipped out of paralysis and into true sleep. When I woke in the morning, I was drenched in sweat, with deep bags under my eyes. I knew I couldn't live like this much longer. The horrors I experienced in those nights between sleep and waking felt more real than anything I'd known. I had to find a way to end the torture, otherwise I really would slip into madness. I had to sleep. So that very day, I swallowed my shame and fear and went to see a doctor. She listened with concern, but not surprise. "You're experiencing sleep paralysis," she explained gently. "A disturbing phenomenon, but not at all supernatural." She went on to describe how it works. The mind waking up before the body, causing temporary paralysis alongside vivid hallucinations. I almost cried with relief. There were no monsters or ghouls. No ghosts or demons tormenting me, just a trick of the sleeping mind. Still frightening, yes, but ultimately explainable. With medication and counseling, I learned to manage the episodes. That looming sense of dread was lifted, and over time, the nightmares faded away completely. I'll never forget those nights held helpless hostage by my own sleeping mind. But now I rest easy, the horrors safely locked away as distant memories. Sweet, peaceful sleep is mine again.